I'm the classic Generation Xer who grew up in the United States. I was a latchkey kid. My father was pretty progressive. He was always the teachable moment about inclusion and differences. My mother put the service ethos in me, and so we were very involved in doing meals in our community. I call myself the pandemic president. You know, it's one thing I often joke to write about crisis, but then when you have to live and lead through a crisis, it's another thing. We don't want our students stressed, and so we want to make sure that we have all the services and the culture to prevent the stress, whether it be tutoring or outside office hours, and encouraging them to find time for fun and joy. When I started as an assistant professor, I was pregnant with my son. And now he's a 29-year-old attorney. So you're constantly adjusting your life to the professional side, the personal side, and then I say the third leg, how you want to serve your community.
Hello and welcome to Project Oneness World. Today we are in conversation with Lynn Perry Wooten, the 9th President of Simmons University. In 2020, after 121 years of the founding of Simmons College, now Simmons University, she became the first African American to lead the university. President Wooten is a seasoned academic and an expert on organizational development and transformation, specializing in crisis leadership, diversity and inclusion, and positive leadership. She is an innovative leader and an author of nearly 30 journal articles, more than 15 book chapters, and 4 books, including The Prepared Leader. We have that book here. This is The Prepared Leader. And the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Arrive and Thrive. And this is Arrive and Thrive right here. Dr. Wooten came to Simmons from Cornell University, where she was the David J. Nolan Dean and Professor of Management and Organizations at the Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management. And before that, she served on the faculty of the University of Michigan, Ross School of Business for nearly 20 years. Dr. Wooten holds a bachelor's degree from North Carolina A&T State University, where she was valedictorian, and she earned an MBA from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and a doctorate from the University of Michigan. She also received a certificate in advanced educational leadership from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. So Dr. Wooten is actively involved in the Boston philanthropic and civic community. She currently serves on the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, the Boston Public Library Board of Trustees, the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center Trustees Advisory Board, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation Board of Advisors, and various other prestigious boards. And Dr. Wooten is married to David Wooten. You'll find a picture right here. And a chaired marketing professor at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. And they have 2 children, Justin and Jada, and you'll see them here as well. And I'm so glad to be speaking with you.
Oh, it's an honor, and I'm glad to storytell with you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I remember being at the Simmons Faculty Senate when you were hired, and there was one word that was used by everyone to describe you at that moment, and that was how awesome you were.
Oh, God, thank you.
And every person who had a chance to talk to you in the interviewing process, and every person, and it was like, oh, she's awesome. I hope she accepts. I hope she accepts. So that was the feeling. And I think I've known you for a few years now since you're joining, and I've always felt very privileged and very blessed, I think, in your company and in your leadership.
Well, it's an honor to interact with you and the Simmons faculty. And really, we talk a lot about life works at Simmons. And I believe that serving as the president is part of my life works.
Thank you. And I think this interview is, in a way, part of my life work as well. As I told you, like, I'm interviewing people. And I think seeing the human behind the labels that we have, right? I think,
right.
And that's important to me. And I see that you doing that as part of your leadership and in the values that you espouse, I think. To begin, Lynn, can you tell us your story in your own words?
Right.
Right from your childhood.
Your origin story is a big part of who you are. You and I both love stories and books, and when I think about my origin story, it starts with my parents. I am a child of the 60s. I am a Generation Xer. So I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Charles and Dolores Perry. My father was brilliant, but he had many careers. He went to college at 14, but his final career, he was a clinical social worker. So it's ironic that I come to a school that has a top social work program. My mother was a Philadelphia public school teacher, so if you've seen everything like Abbott Elementary on TV, that was her life. I am an only child, and on my father's side, I am the only grandchild.
Wow.
And so lots of attention was given to me. On my mother's side, I was the youngest girl for 17 years with lots of aunts. So many people raised me. But growing up in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s before I left for college, it really was a time of empowerment. So there was a lot about Black empowerment. There was a lot about women's empowerment. And that was a big part of who I am. And then because my parents were both educators by nature, my father being so brilliant, education was kind of his second calling after social work, my mother being a teacher. Every moment, every day was a teachable moment. Whether they were using Philadelphia as a backdrop to take me to museums and libraries and shows, or wherever they were making sure that I got all A's and B's in my academics. So very much thought I would always be an educator because I saw the power of education. So my parents were a big influence. The second big influence on me, I would say, from a relationship-wise, was really the power of community and a village. Yes, I had wonderful parents, but I had a whole village of people who raised me. My mother's one of 10, so I have lots of aunts and uncles. My mother also has tons of friends. So similar to your culture, all of my mother's girlfriends are my aunties. And so all of this was big influence on me, this village of raising me up and growing up then. When you think about the time I grew up, I'm the classic Generation Xer who grew up in the United States. I was a latchkey kid. And really, back in the 70s and 80s, we had key rings because parents were working. This is the first generation where women were really working and raising kids. And so I had a key ring where I would let myself in. I might start dinner. I might do homework, those type of things. So being a Generation Xer, kind of this middle generation between the baby boomers and the millennials, influence who I am. And then when I think about gender equity in particular, I actually wanted to be a home economics major. Everybody's heard this story. I thought I would be the next Black Martha Stewart. But I had aunts and people in my life that said, wait a second, maybe you don't want to do home economics. Think about doing something different or how you can combine that with you. And so I ended up checking off business on my SAT form. And that's how I ended up with pursuing business because colleges started writing me with scholarships. So when I think about my origin years, it's about family and community. It's about being a Generation Xer, and it's about the important institutions in my life. Those institutions were my school system, and so I'm in the first generation that went to integrated public schools, but I also went to a private school for elementary, one of the leading Black-owned private schools. The library was a big part of who I was. I love libraries. I spent lots of times in libraries. Museums were a big part of who I am. And then community-based organizations, very involved in my church, and I loved being a Girl Scout.
And who were your friends growing up?
Oh God, yeah, my friends. Well, I was just talking to one of my best friends. Her name was Camille Outlaw. So I went to an all-girls high school. So all-girls high school, which was equivalent to Boston Latin, which is right across the way from us. And then I went to a middle school, which was a magnet school. So we had to take a test to get into this school, and the brightest people went. And because Philadelphia is actually much bigger and spread out than Boston, you spend a lot of time as a young child on public transportation. So from the age of 10, I was catching public transportation by myself to go to these magnet schools. But I think about my best friends growing up. One was my girlfriend in church, Denise. I think about my girlfriends who were in Girl Scouts. And then I think about my friend Camille Outlaw, who we met in middle school, actually in home economics class. And what we found out is that our parents were friends from college. Wow. And she was the maid of honor in my wedding. So she had a big influence on my formative years.
Any specific incident or times that you remember with your parents growing up which influenced in some ways? Maybe a small dinner time conversation or anything. Anything that was like that you learned. I think some learning moments.
Right. Learning moments, they're the observation moments of working hard. Both of my parents worked very hard. They were hard workers. They got up early in the morning. Traditional middle class. My mom would get up early to go teach at her school. And in fact, I had one girlfriend her girlfriend was just saying, your mom was always early. She did everything on time. And in fact, one time she decorated her whole classroom the week before school started. And then the principal told her she had to move. So she was always work ethics that way. And my father, who grew up on a tobacco farm, was used to getting up early. So very much that way. But there were lots of teachable moments I can think of. One is because my father was pretty progressive, he was always the teachable moment about inclusion and differences and understanding varied gender differences, neurodiversity differences, race differences, religion differences, everything he would do. If he was teaching me about the Jewish culture or the Hindu culture or the Muslim culture, some differences, he always used it as a historical moment. Other moments that I think about were lots of car trips because my parents had migrated from down south. My mother from the Tidewater, Virginia area, my father from North Carolina. So going back home to see family, there were lots of teachable moments there. My father believed that every day was supposed to be a classroom, so I always had to take classes in the summer or study in the summer and work in journals and those type of things. My mother put the service ethos in me, and so we were very involved in doing meals in our community. Many times students go hungry during the summertime because they're not free lunches. And so my mother and I would work at the church giving students free lunches in the summertime so that they had a meal. And then even when I came back from college, we would do Thanksgiving dinner for the homeless. So the service ethos a lot from my mom.
So you got I think some very, I mean, things which people don't get all their life sometimes, I feel. Understanding differences between people and respecting that.
Especially in the 70s and the 80s, the things that he taught me. Very progressive.
Being able to serve people as an example, like as part of what you do.
Right.
So I think so that explains, because I was trying to get at how did you become the kind of person that you are, right? And I think that's where you had some of the beginnings.
Right
at home.
I mean, I had those beginnings because my mother never wanted me to be a spoiled brat only child. So it was always about service. It was always about sharing. You know, I had sisters, cousins, everyone, and giving back to the community. It's a big part of who I am.
Right. Tell me about what happened since childhood as you grew up.
I remember I said that I really did not plan to check business off on my PSATs, but back then, I want to joke, is they were using artificial intelligence where you check off what careers you were interested on your SATs, and they would buy names. This is 1983.
Okay.
So I checked off accounting because my mother's youngest sister was an internal revenue agent. She was influenced me in accounting. I had another mother's sister who had done her MBA at University of Pennsylvania Wharton, and so that she was an IBM executive. And I happened to check off accounting, and back in 1983, there were not many women of color who were checking off accounting. So schools started writing me with accounting scholarships. And in particular, North Carolina A&T wrote me with an excellent scholarship, an alumni scholarship, and that's how I ended up there. It wasn't on my radar before. And so I was an undergrad accounting major, studied for the CPA exam, but always knew that education was in my soul and thought I wanted to be a professor. But I said, okay, let me test this out. Before I commit to a PhD program, I'm going to go get an MBA. So I received my MBA at Duke, and I was a TA for accounting when I was at Duke, and I still had that research interest. One of my professors mentored me. I started applying to PhD programs. Had never thought that I was going to live in the Midwest, but if you know, Midwest is a very big place for PhD programs, the Big Ten. Got into Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, and chose Michigan. And so, therefore, I ended up in Ann Arbor. That's where I met my husband. He was 2 years ahead of me in the PhD program. He's a marketing professor, so he was getting his PhD in marketing. And that's where I also met my best friend, who's like a sister. She was a year behind me in the PhD program, and we started writing together even in the PhD program. So I know you're going to ask me about those moments of serendipity and when you meet people who are destined to be on your journey. And going and getting my PhD in Michigan, which I thought was the middle of nowhere, right? I remember I grew up on the East Coast, was definitely part of my journey there. So I spent 10 years in college. I joke, I came to college in 1984, and I never left, starting from undergrad to a master's to a PhD, and then various faculty appointments.
So you fell in love with academia in some ways.
I fell in love with academia from the minute I hit a college campus. And then I have a cousin who's a geography professor, but my father's sister, he's one of two, is an art history professor, and she was the first black woman to get a PhD in art history. So had lots of influences about being a professor. It's kind of like, it's our family business, I like to joke with.
When you talk about, you're in your field, right? You have been both a leader in your research field as well as a leader in academia. So how did you think that happened, that leadership?
Right. And I actually do think of my career as kind of the pre-leadership career and really the what we all do every day. I didn't think I was going to actually be an academic administrator. I started my career with the passion for research and teaching, especially teaching. As I said, I've been a TA. I was a tutor in undergrad, a TA in the MBA program, a graduate fellow teacher in the PhD program. I love teaching, and I miss the classroom because I don't get there a lot. So the classroom trajectory, I've invested a lot of energy into it. For example, thinking about writing case studies and best pedagogy to bring corporate strategy to the classroom, simulations and lessons and learning management systems. At the same time, thinking a lot about my research. So my dissertation was on corporate strategy practices for accounting firms, and I did a lot of surveying in my dissertation. But then I also started to branch out on multiple topics. When I think about organizational culture, it's a big one. So these positive organizational culture and how organizational culture is a competitive advantage. I built a career around many forms of diversity, so looking at discrimination lawsuits, looking at women-friendly organizations. And then the third leg is really about crisis leadership. How do organizations and individuals and teams come back?
Right.
So really, when researchers think about their career, I often say it's about building this portfolio. What articles, what books do you want to write? What tools do you want to make? What monographs? And I've had some great co-authors too. I often say people think research is a solo sport, but it's not. So my co-authors have been fabulous.
My experience has been the same. I have been like co-authoring with so many people for many years
Yes.
now. And I feel that you're spending a big part of your life doing that. So it's
A
good
big part.
So it's good to have smart people, but also very good people.
Good people, and they become like friends and
They
family.
become friends,
Yeah.
right? You share what's going on with
Right.
them, and then you start writing.
Right.
So,
Dean James at the Wharton School, we've been writing together since 1991. That's a long time to be writing together and co-authoring. And I have other people, Laura Morgan Roberts at University of Virginia. So I have a lot of other co-authors too that I've written with, or people I've been on grants with.
right.
So that's how the academic career really started, from my dissertation and building a research program around those core areas. When I was promoted to associate professor, though, I started getting tapped for administrative roles. And even before then, probably I like to say my first administrative role started when I was a co-PI on a National Institute of Health grant. And that was looking at how organizational practices could alleviate healthcare disparities. And that was a huge grant, multidisciplinary grant. After that, I co-led a Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship with Professor Jane Dutton, and then I went into the dean's office. So for the last, I always have to benchmark how old my kids are. Probably my son is going to be 30 soon. Probably 2/3 of his life I've been doing some form of administration.
Right. And even before administration, when you were talking about your teaching, right?
Yeah.
I noticed that in your CV you talked about knowledge management leadership, I think was one of
Right. That was one of the first courses I developed based on my dissertation, and it was about how do you work in accounting and consulting and advertising firms and knowledge management firms and lead and build a career and strategize. So that was the first class I designed on my own.
Yeah, I teach knowledge management, so that was interesting to me when I saw that you had taught that, because one of the things they talk about knowledge management is that get your highest university administration to buy into knowledge management.
Right. How do you build these systems of knowledge? How do you build people systems? How do you build client service systems? And ironically, our board chair, who's past managing partner of Goodwin, sometimes she guest lectures in the Harvard version of that class of knowledge management for professional service firms. So it's been a full circle moment.
No, it is. And coming back to the administration part of it, right? And you were dean before you became president.
I was dean, yes.
Right.
I like to say the dean is like being a governor, is how I say it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Before you became president. So what has changed and what has not changed in terms of being a leader?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. For each trajectory, as you move up, you have to start learning a new skill set. And then you have to also start delegating better. So I started thinking about when I was a center director, could I do and what did I need to delegate? And each skill set. But being a dean versus being a president, it's the level of systems change you can make. At a dean, you're focusing on leading your college, your school. You're thinking about curriculum. You're thinking about faculty and how you develop faculty. You're thinking about transformational experiences for your school. And in some ways also, I was very involved in higher education as it relates to the business school, in particular, how we integrate liberal arts into business education. So I was very involved in the Aspen Institute. But at the president level, you're thinking about a whole level of systems changes. You're thinking about the various 6 colleges and schools that make up Simmons University, the various degree programs. You're thinking more about the finances of the school. You're thinking about the strategy. You're thinking more about philanthropy and fundraising. I often say right now my 3 big strategic corridors are differentiation, distinction, transformational learning and scholarship, and financial sustainability for a small college. So it's everything at the systems level. Each time you get promoted in academic administration, it's a bigger level of system thinking.
What were the levels levels of difficulty that came up, and how you navigated them, and then maybe the same difficulties arose again, and you're like, wait a minute, I've done that before.
You've done that before, right?
Yeah.
And so the first one is, I want to say, is every level, it's about the people. And so how do you serve the people to accomplish the goal? And how do you ensure that you're showing up to be your best self and bringing the best out in people? In academia, everybody's the smartest person in the room. And so that's the big one of bringing the best out. The other level at everyone I think about is that the collective impact. There's no point in bringing a group of people together, whether it be a team, a department, a research institute, as when you come in the room, you can't make something bigger than yourself. So at every level, I'm trying to think about what's the collective impact that the institute wants to have? What's the collective impact that Simmons wants to have? What's the collective impact that the Ross School of Business wants to have? You're constantly having external pressures. I call myself the pandemic president, so navigating the external pressures of the world of higher education post-pandemic. You know, early on in my career, I had to live through the dot-com bubble. There's always something. So it's the intersection of the external and the internal pressures and how you address those. And then there's the personal side, because as you're moving in your career, you're going up the ladder and you're having different experiences, but then your life is changing too. When I started as an assistant professor, I was pregnant with my son. And now he's a 29-year-old attorney. So you're constantly adjusting your life to the professional side, the personal side, and then I say the third leg, how you want to serve your community.
And it's interesting to talk about people and teams, right? So I have a friend who told me that if there are 5 people in a room, and let's say the ages are 50s or 60s, anything, right? And it's 250 to 300 years of experience together in that room. And that's huge, right? And then and the more people...
And that's what leaders are there to do, to harness that power of everybody in the room to create that collective wisdom. So that's a great example.
I was thinking that, so when you talk so much about people, right? So what does a person mean to you? Like just an example of person or people in general.
You know, when I think about people, I really do see their soul, and the strengths that they bring in the room, whether they're quiet or like to talk. And I try to harness on each person and understand, why are they here? Why have they been called into this room? So I'll take why are they here at Simmons University? How can I help them develop on their personal leadership journey? And then as a collective, how can we serve Simmons? And so this is constantly. So every person that I meet, I want to know their origin story. What brought them here? What strengths do they bring in the room? How can I help them develop as a leader? And then what they want to contribute to the organization that I'm working on. But I love hearing people's origin stories in particular.
Now when you lead these huge faculty meetings, meetings of board of trustees, all of these big meetings that you're a part of, right? What do you see? Do you see people? Do you see roles?
No, I tend to see individual people. But if I'm on a big Zoom, then I see the collective. But Gantz is a Harvard sociologist, and often this is what I think about. He says that everything we starts with, you know, what is the me story? So what story am I bringing to people? What is the you story? And then what is the we story? And so that is how I try to approach every relationship, whether it be on Zoom or one-on-one meetings with each other. Understand, I want people to know who I am, my authentic self, and showing up. And from day one, everywhere I go, I try to show up to be my authentic self. But I'm always curious about people's stories. So my one question whenever I meet someone, especially when I'm walking in the halls from students, I say, where are you from? Because where are you from and who you are tell me a lot about you. And then I say, what made you come to Simmons? And then I start to say the we story and understand it from there.
One thing that's a challenge to me sometimes, and I want to see how you navigate that. So when you have people sometimes saying mean things, right? And how do you see them, or how do you take that? Yeah.
Right. You know, most people I can deal with, but I have to tell you a secret. I have a hard time with mean people. So when I hear people say mean things, at first I take a deep breath. And then I say, okay, what is going on there? What can I own? Did I do something to offend that person? And how can I correct it? Or what's going on in that person's life that's making them say something mean? And what's coming out in their ego and what's happening in their life? And how can I turn that around to make sure that we get on a positive start? So I really try to put my ego aside, ask myself, did I do something to offend the person? How can I show up with grace? And then how can we turn it around and create a win-win situation? So once again, it goes back to the we. Sometimes people are just having a bad day.
There's this need for human connection, right? And people need hugs. Sometimes when people are mean, that means that they need a bigger hug. Sometimes I've seen that if that happens to me, right? If somebody's saying something mean, and if I don't react at that moment, what I tend to do is that pull myself out of it.
That's that pause I talk about taking that pause, stepping back.
Stepping back, right? And now it's about take yourself out and just think for this person now.
Right.
Why this person might be saying that. And the moment you are out of it, right, the ego goes away.
Exactly. The moment you have to take yourself out of it, take the ego out of it and say, what's going on and how am I here to serve this person?
And then no matter what the person says, it's like a patient going to a doctor and complaining. You try to see, okay, now that I've understood, what can I do about it, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen that if we are able to do that, and it's very hard.
It's very hard
very
because
hard.
we all have personalities, right?
Yeah.
We all have feelings and emotions, and when someone's mean to us, it hurts.
Yeah.
And so it takes a lot of grace, a lot of energy, and a lot of thinking about what's the life lessons even in this moment of meanness.
In this moment. And I think if we are able to do that, in terms of not react in the same manner at that moment, then I've seen that some of those people can actually end up becoming our biggest supporters.
Exactly, exactly. I even thinking about the middle school bully who I become friends with, later in life, right? Yeah.
So I think this is a hard lesson, but I've seen that because a lot of people, friendly people are easy to deal with, right?
Right, but the groaner is, it's kind of like the Michelle Obama quote, right? When they go low, we go high.
We go high, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So it's the same verse.
It's the same thing.
Inverse, yeah. And it's hard. It's a lesson, and I talk about this a lot with my wife and kids. But it's something that's important, I think.
It's hard. Now, how old are your children?
I have a daughter who is 16 now, and a son who's 9.
So you have a 7-year gap like me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because mine are 29 and 22.
29, 22. The older siblings almost like parental to the younger one in many ways.
In many ways, the younger one can be a parent too.
Those are the questions I'm interested in terms of how do you deal with people. I know, in terms of, because I know it's hard.
It's all day long. That is my job now. It's funny. My father was a social worker. I thought I'd never be a social worker, but all day long, my job is really about bringing out the best of people to advance the mission of Simmons.
Yeah.
That is what I do. And it's hard. These are hard times. The 4 years that we've seen since the pandemic, I believe, have been the hardest times I've seen in my life, and people are struggling. We see lots of mental illness, lots of meanness, lots of depression, and the job is really to help those people.
Yeah. And I think I want to talk a little bit about, you had those 9 things.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
my 9 strategic priorities. Yeah.
And I don't remember them offhand, but do you know some of them? Like maybe 3?
Right. I can. I'll start at the high level of them. The high level is what I call the people row.
Yeah.
So there's the people row, and then when everybody thinks about their strategy and their strategic map, even on the personal level, you have a strategic map for what you want to accomplish in the classroom research. First is Simmons is a university for students. And you and I both have wonderful college experience. So the first quadrant I see is that how do I make these transformational experience for students inside and outside the classroom? And the magic of the classroom really comes from the faculty. But we often forget that a lot of education happens outside the classroom, in the dorms, through athletics, through clubs, through career coaching. So the first one is transformational experiences for our students. The next one is empowering faculty excellence. As a president, that's my job. The core of who we are our faculty, and our provost Stephanie talks a lot about that. And then the third kind of little cell for people is being a great place to work. Ironically, all through my career, I've studied companies and how being a great place to work is a competitive advantage. So I'm thinking about the many ways to be a great place to work. It comes not only to salary and compensation and benefits, but developmental opportunities. It comes to a caring community. So those are the big ones there. Then you start to go to the middle row. I think a lot about leadership and how leadership is part of our distinction. I don't know, I'm excited about our Carnegie classification. We were one of the first universities to get the Carnegie classification for leadership for a public purpose. So in everything we do, we're thinking about leadership at Simmons and the many forms of leadership. Not if leadership as a positional title, but this notion of what I call everyday leadership and how they arrive and thrive. The other big one is this notion of inclusive excellence. How do we create a culture where everyone can prioritize well-being and feel like they belong? Accessibility services, I think about. I think about the many different cultures that we have in this particular university. Fundraising's big, so this culture of philanthropy and calling all of us to be philanthropic. Part of my philanthropy is this notion that we all have the 5 T's to give to organizations that we're proud of. Yes, organizations want your treasure, but we also want your time. We want you to serve your talent. We want your ties, so making a bigger network, so anybody you can do. And then we want you to be brand ambassadors, so we want your testimonies. So that's been big. Another one of my strategic priorities is the One Simmons Project and creating a vibrant campus. You think about it, campuses make a difference. The spaces, look at this beautiful room we're in. The One Simmons Project, how we were able to redesign our science centers, and the new living and learning community that we have coming up. And then operational excellence. And operational excellence comes in many forms. Everything from making sure the buildings are well kept to what I call our customer service ethos.
And these are all like, I mean, we could talk about each
right,
one
each of these could be a podcast.
Yeah,
right.
each one of these is really so big. But maybe I'll talk about one or two terms. So one is inclusive excellence.
Yes.
Right? And those terms, like, so can you talk about it? Excellence and inclusive.
Right,
yeah.
right. Some people will say, oh my God, when you talk about inclusion, you're giving up excellence. But that's not the case. When I talk about inclusive excellence, I'm asking about, we're all a mosaic in organizational life, and we all bring differences.
Yeah.
So how do we create a culture where we can thrive, where people feel welcome, where they feel belong? Whether it be in the classroom to make sure everybody can understand your lecture and have accessibility services, where it's making sure we have a prayer room for different faith-based cultures, all of those are important. When we think about even the design of the building, inclusive excellence also means the research we show and how we're looking at research for things from healthcare disparities to the wealth gap. All of those make up inclusive excellence. How do we manage conflict?
Right.
How do we have a dialogue and discourse in a difficult time when we become a culture where people want to be me versus them? All of those are the many forms of inclusive excellence that are empowered. They're really powerful. The other form of inclusive excellence starts from our founder, John Simmons. 125 years ago, John Simmons was this Renaissance man. And he made his money from producing ready-made suits. And he realized that he was working with women a lot, and women were underpaid and they didn't have a good education. So he left his bequest so that women could have a college education where they can make a livelihood and have economic empowerment. That's a form of inclusive excellence. Another dimension that we do at Simmons is we serve the mighty middle. Often in universities and higher education and even in K-12 systems, we think about people at both ends of the spectrum. But we need places and institutions that really are serving that middle of the distribution curve, that give them opportunities to have high quality education and to develop their career goals.
And you talked about one more thing. I'm thinking along the same lines. It's transformative leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And how does that tie in with inclusive excellence?
Yeah, it ties in particular. I actually think about on the faculty side, and how it ties in is every professor and faculty member at Simmons is a leader. Kathy Mercier that's the president of our faculty senate. She talks about almost like being a partner at the firm. And part of inclusive excellence is in the scholarship we advocate and the many forms of scholarship. They're all different types of scholarship. And so we need to respect them and create cultures where they thrive. The scholarship of teaching and pedagogy, the scholarship of applied research, the scholarship of traditional research, the scholarship of integrative research when people work across disciplines. That's a form of inclusive excellence that everyone can thrive at Simmons who works here as a faculty.
And so when students come in, right, let's say who may not have heard of Simmons, although many of whom have heard but don't know much about it, what do we do as a university to make them feel welcome?
What do we do to make them feel welcome? Or even before they start welcome, we just had open house, and I think there were about 60 people here on Sunday. Is that why choose Simmons first? And I'll start talking about that. So often I say, going back, you were talking about my 9 cells. At the core and the center of those 9 cells or how I leverage the 4L. So you can think I think a lot in things. And it starts with creating inclusive learning communities. That's the first L, how we do learning in library science or nursing or physical therapy or children's literature or nutrition. So the learning community, the classroom, it starts there. The academic advising, the study groups, all of the special programs. The second L is that we do inclusive leadership because the L is leadership. People often say, I came to Simmons because I got a great scholarship or they had the major or I wanted to be in Boston. But what happened is I was transformed because Simmons helped me to find my voice as a leader, my voice to serve leadership for that public purpose that I talked about for the Carnegie classification. The next L that I often talk about is, and you talked about this, is people feel included when you help them put on a trajectory for their life works. And this is what we do at Simmons. And remember, both you and I think of life works as something bigger than just your profession. Yes, I'm a professor. Yes, I'm a university president. But my life works is bigger than that. My life works is how I serve as a parent, how I serve as a wife. My life work is for my faith-based community. My life work is for my civic community in the city I live in. All of those intersect with my life works, how I serve my community. And so we make people feel included because they're able to envision that roadmap for their life works. And a big part of what we do at Simmons also for inclusion is we think about service and kind of inclusion in the next L, Boston as a location. So we have lots of students who go out and do community service, so we're more of inclusive agents there. They're working with high schools. In fact, I'm hosting a high school later this week. They might be working, we had people work with homeless shelters, getting out the vote, all of those particular things, but serving Boston. When you read my bio, you can see I love serving Boston. So sitting on the Boston Public Library and the Kennedy Library thinking about that, and the Boston Chamber of Commerce, all of those are big ways also that I think about inclusive excellence and expanding the sphere of it.
I think seeing all these people, right, and I'm thinking especially people post-pandemic, right?
Right.
And I know we're not really post-pandemic, but since the most adverse times that we went through in 2020, 2021. Right. And so a lot of people are kind of scarred in many ways, right, since then. And people have been through a lot, of other people have been through a lot.
Yep.
And so how do we deal with these people, these students, these faculty, these staff,
exactly,
all the people who are here post-pandemic in some ways?
Right. We have to, I believe there are two key things there. Building for resiliency. And when I think about resiliency, it goes back almost once again. I said, how do we deal with mean people? Even how do we deal with hard times? How do we deal with those crucible moments? So this resiliency starts with, you know what? Life is hard. I have to give myself grace. I have to give my time for self-care. I have to give my time to take that pause. And in those moments, after you take that pause, after you take that self-care, you think how all of us needed to go into our homes during the beginning of the pandemic. Then you have to say, okay, my world is changing. And what do I need to learn to be for this new world? And my personal life and my professional life. 5 years ago, how many of us knew how to teach and have Zoom meetings? We all had to change and become this warriors at Zoom, this Zoom friendly. And somebody was just showing me a new AI function for Zoom where you can bring in your own EA.
Oh, yes.
Right,
yeah.
The Fathom function. So we had to all say, what do I need to learn for this new world? And every phase of life, you're going to have crucible moments, and you're going to have joyful moments, and you have to ask yourself, what do I need to learn? What you need to parent a 16-year-old is very different than what you need to parent a 2-year-old. And then finally, after you do this learning map, what I say is, then what do I need to grow? What are those growth investments I need to make? And part of my theory is that when you're going through these challenging times, and what I say to people in Simmons is, this is when you need community. We need classroom communities. We need co-curricular communities. And we need communities just to have fun and bring joy.
Right, yeah.
Starting back with my origin story, the one value that my parents taught me is community and the power of community. And when we come together, we can solve anything. In the book Prepared Leader, I often talk about the notion of mega communities. And the theory is that mega communities come together when there's a big, complicated problem. Why were we able to come up with a vaccine so quickly? Because the government community came together, the nonprofit community came together, and the corporate community came together to solve the vaccine for a pandemic.
Right.
We need to see that for many other problems.
And I think if people actually came together, even to solve, let's say, poverty, right?
Right, poverty. I was thinking education gaps. Yeah.
We could solve it if only
Right.
people came together.
Yeah, only if people came together.
Yeah.
And I think about, and in multiple forms, I've been thinking a lot lately about the need for tutoring. And I have, and how expensive it is to prepare for college. So, or to prepare for anything, SATs, LSATs, or just when your child's having a tutorial problem. But then you think about the generosity of somebody like Khan Academy and how that came together to meet a need, and how the sponsorship and the intelligence, so you have all these online tutorial platforms. So poverty, educational gaps, healthcare gaps, all of those type of things that we could come together.
And we could solve it, I think.
We could solve it, but
Yeah,
we need that commitment. And that's the power of mega communities, when people come together. And how you started when you said, your professor said, if you have 5 people in the room and they're 50, that's 250 years of knowledge. Well, how can we use that knowledge for all of those type of things?
one of the difficulties which I feel people go through is being stumbled by human differences. So egos come in, and then human differences come in. They say, "Oh, yeah, I cannot do this," and I think how can we, as people with different roles in our lives, do something to help people navigate these differences?
Right. It comes back to the personal level. At Cornell, we had something where we would do this breaking bread. We would do these breaking bread sessions. We would bring people for bread and soup. And when you bring people from differences together, and they can see the humanity, and you start to story tell and experiences, and inside the formal organization and outside the organization. So my husband and I have been married for almost 31 years, and we invited a lot of our classmates to the wedding when we got married. And in particular, some of our classmates who were Indian or of the Hindu faith, and they came to the wedding and they were like, wait a second, this wedding's no different than our weddings, right? And so bringing people together for inside and outside of formal institutions to get to see each other. Creating dialogue across differences is so important, and we're doing that work in Simmons. Having these conversations where people come together and see the common bond are so important, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities. We all care about our family and our friends and our well-being and our institutions. And bringing people for dialogue is so important.
What do you think, let's say I as a faculty member could do more of in terms of trying to help people navigate these differences?
Using teachable moments in the classroom. And so whenever first of all, getting students to know each other. So we did lots of group work when I used to teach, and making sure that the group is building a culture of common grounds, that people are knowing their stories. I mean, I still remember my corporate strategy group in undergrad and how we spent time getting to know each other. Designing groups so that people can thrive is really important. Bringing in case studies and examples of all the diaspora is so important. And whatever you do, you can bring differences. Creating a culture of respect is also really important, I believe. And storytelling, bring your whole self. So when I'm teaching in the classroom, I'm storytelling about my life and my kids and showing personal examples too. Right. So and also using your research.
Yeah. No, and talking about you, actually you're talking about so many interesting things. I'm thinking about which way should I go, but it's so you talked about a culture of respect, and you talked about, and I think you talked about research, and your research is making me think of crisis leadership. That's one of your primary areas.
Yes.
Right? And I was very enamored when I saw that in your bio early on, like a few years ago, and crisis leadership. So I think, like, how do you bring these two together? Let's say crisis leadership and respect.
Yeah. And it's one thing I often joke to write about crisis, but then when you have to live and lead through a crisis, it's another thing. Crisis leadership and respect, at the heart of our research, we talk about it begins with building trust, and building trust starts with the people. Understanding in every situation, in a crisis or a non-crisis situation, who are the people you're trying to care about? Customers, students, clients. One of the crises that we studied was how Emory University's healthcare system handled the Ebola crisis. And right away, they knew they were bringing an Ebola patient to their healthcare system. And they thought about, okay, my community is going to go into fear. So how do we build trust? And they were really intentional about building trust. They communicated, one, that this is a crisis we've been preparing for at Emory. We are a research-oriented university, and this is how we prepared. We designed an infrastructure where this person will be incubated and not be around people. And then they did an op-ed where the nurses talked about how the nurses were going to serve the community. They did another message about how they were going to serve students. So it all comes to the trust bank and educating people about the crisis situation and how you're going to take care of the people. That's the important thing. In addition, in a crisis situation, Jerry Maguire in his movie talks about show me the money.
Show me the money, yeah.
We joke about show me the data in a crisis situation and how the data can help inform you. One of the examples that I talk about is that in a crisis situation, Walmart is very good at using data. They have huge data systems, and they know what people are going to do and how to navigate and get things quickly. So Walmart knows in a crisis situation, for example, their top products used to be people want water, they want batteries, but the interesting one is and they want Pop-Tarts because kids love Pop-Tarts and you don't need power to heat them up.
All right.
So understanding the data and what the data shows. And then a big component of my research with Dean Jane also is that once the crisis is over and you prioritize people and communication and you resolve the crisis, the big deal about crisis leadership is how do I learn to be better? What did I learn from this crisis? That goes back to resiliency. And when the next crisis comes around, what can I apply?
What does it take for a person to be resilient?
Well, it takes, as I said, it takes grace, right? It takes the ability to listen to others. And so I often say you need that personal board of directors in a crisis situation. You have to first listen to yourself and be introspective. And then you have to have your personal board of directors.
So your friends,
your colleagues, the wise sages. Malcolm Gladwell also talks about you need a connector. So connector and your personal board of directors are those people who know other people. Because sometimes you have to bring new people into your network, those ties to solve problems in a crisis situation. And Malcolm Gladwell also talks about you need mavens. So I'm sure you have mavens in your life. Mavens are those people who know something about everything. I often talk about my mother's girlfriend, Miss Vern, and my aunt's roommate, Rita. And they're just people who know something about everything. Miss Vern has passed, but Rita's still living. So if you text Rita and you say, Rita, where do I get such and such? Or who's the expert on that? And so when you're going through the crisis situation, who are those mavens in your life that can bring new knowledge in? So that personal board of directors is important. That learning map is important. And then you gotta spend time problem solving. You need all those smart people in the room, those 250 years of wisdom to come up with it. That's what resilience is about.
What is the role of friendship in your life?
Oh my, the role of friendship is a big... I learned a lot about friendship from my mother. And my mother had a host of girlfriends. My mother never met a stranger. So she didn't drive, so she took public transportation on the bus. She taught at multiple schools. She was involved in her church. She had 5 sisters, so there were lots of friends. And so in my life, I've been able to model friendship. I talk about my best friend and my co-author, who we really have been friends since grad school, since 1991, and we're both only children. So it's like having a sister. It's like having a co-author. It's having a member of your personal board of directors. We've raised our kids together. Her oldest and my youngest are 5 days apart. We both started our current job together. So friendship has been a big part of ways. One, it's been an asset for my career. My friends are on my personal board of directors. And it's just been a way where I've been able to also, I think, serve the world better because of collective impact.
When I meet a lot of parents these days, especially parents of teenagers, many of them worry that their kids don't have friends, they don't have enough friends.
Right. And this is why I think extracurricular and co-curricular are so important. And my kids are a little bit above the curve on the generation of being people on their phone and before the pandemic. But one is that I always had my children involved after school, so they didn't have time to be on phones, and nurtured friends through play groups, through activities, through sports teams and dance and church and those type of things, because friendships are so important. They're almost like a lifelong gift. A lot of times, my in-laws are deceased, my father's deceased, I just have my mother, but friends will be without you for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
And this notion of you learn about leadership through friendship. You learn about sharing. You learn different perspectives.
Right. And before you came in, right, I was talking to Maria, and she was talking about a gift, like asking each person to find their gift in life, whether it's painting or something, right?
Right.
And so I think... So firstly, I think friendship itself is a gift. The other gift that Maria was talking about was, I think, trying to find your personal, what you have to give to the world. Yeah,
there are 2 gifts, what you have to give to the world. And I want to come back to friendship in particular. As you know, I lived my formative adult years, about almost more than 20 plus years in Ann Arbor. And my parents did not travel a lot. And so that friendship of that village, and even when I moved there as a PhD student, there were a generation of women who were a year older than me, who adopted me and mentored me, those big sisters and those play mothers and those type of things. And then we raised our kids in a collective village of a great group of friends. And in fact, my husband still plays cards every week with the same group of friends. So we did holidays together and family vacations together. And sometimes if somebody had a good teacher, we say, well, you should go to that teacher, you should go to that tutor. So even parenting is not a solo sport.
Right.
So the gift of friendship is one of the best gifts you can give your children. When I think about my parents, especially my mother, that is the best gift, more than any monetary gift, any gift that I got for a holiday, for a birthday, the gift of her friends. So friendship is a really important investment. And sometimes, my children won't listen to me, but they'll listen to my friends.
All right.
Right. And you might have the same with your children. But then there's the discovery, part of being a faculty member is, part of being a parent, part of being a leader is helping people to observe their gifts. And we all have gifts. I often think about gifts. One is that we start to discover our gifts through education. And then we start to see this natural ability. We have an expertise in something. There's also the gift of experience. All the different experiences that we can give people help us realize what our gift is. Coming to Boston, I have a whole nother set of gifts that I've developed. Gifts that I didn't have when I lived in Ithaca or in Ann Arbor. We also, when we're looking at the gift and what gifts we have to think about our emotional intelligence too. That's a big important thing. And that's a particular strength. But whenever I have a student in the classroom, I'm trying to figure out what's their strength. How can I nurture and develop that strength? And how can we use that strength to make the world a better place and help them with their life works?
Right. And now I'm thinking about emotional intelligence, and that's a big one too.
That's a big one, right?
That's a big one. And I think that's our ability to handle our emotions.
It's the ability to handle your emotions, to realize that we're emotional beings. And in some ways it just comes down to being kind, especially in organizational life. How I show my emotions, how I show up, how I contribute. It's, nobody wants a boss that's yelling or not being nice or not knowing how to manage conflict.
Yeah, so I think when we talk of emotions, right, I think there was a quote which I read saying that emotions are like waves in the sea. Yeah. So in the sense that they're not lasting, but they're important.
They're not, but they're important, and they have impact because I remember how people treat me. And so that's why emotions are very important.
There's this, I think one of the research frameworks I was using for one of my papers had this Russell's matrix, which has basically a person's emotional map in a way.
Right.
And we have kind of two things. One is a state of peacefulness or not at any given point. Right. Are we agitated or are we peaceful? And the other thing is about, like, are we excited at this moment or not?
Yeah.
So it goes into these 4 quadrants where you could either be very friendly and excited, or you could be very friendly and calm, like not so excited.
Right.
Or you could be agitated and annoyed and all that.
I love that.
Or you could be sad and depressed.
Right.
And that matrix was talking about, and I used that for one of my papers. I was doing some research on non-response behavior, how people don't respond to phone calls or messages, and what that has on people. But if we think that we are in one of those 4 quadrants at any point in time, and every person we are interacting with is also in one of those 4 quadrants, right? Then that means that person is either friendly and excited, or just calm and tired, or maybe annoyed or depressed in one of those 4 kinds of things, maybe sad or in some ways. Then our understanding our own state of mind or emotions at a given point in time, and understanding another person's emotions at a point in time, will help us navigate our interactions.
And we always want people in that friendly and engaged.
The friendly
right?
engaged.
That's the way. So how do we get people? And even how do we design classroom? How do we design meetings? How do we design one-on-one interactions? Are so important. That's a great yes.
Right. So I think once we understand that we are, in a way, a bundle of emotions, right?
Right.
And people we interact with are also a bundle of emotions, and that's where I think our mind comes in. What tools do we have to deal with a mind?
Yeah, and and becoming a habit of mind. So what does it take to deal with that? And what is the best time of day? Even knowing when your energy goes up and down, because that might be impact if you're friendly and engaged. Understanding what else is happening in your life is important, and making sure that you're asking yourself, if I'm not in the quadrant, how do I get back in that quadrant?
So I think about this a lot in terms of emotions and a mind, and you earlier talked about self-care as well, right? So I'm thinking, what do you do for self-care? What does that mean to you?
Right, what do I do for self-care? Well, I like to spend lots of time with family and friends, so that's very important to me. I love reading. You heard me talk about my love for library. I like to cook, so I was cooking with my daughter last night. We were meal prepping, but those are the big ones. One of the things is about self-care is you need to understand your values, because I believe values direct how you're able to self-care. And my top 3 values are, I love the pursuit of excellence. So in my mind, sometimes I'm meditating. What's the next thing I need to pursue excellence for? I love community, so being in community and thinking about it. What's the next time I have to be in community and this art of gathering? And then learning. So for me, a lot of it is learning and self-care, but very disciplined about what I eat, try to be disciplined about what I sleep, and prioritize friends, family, and my community.
And do you put exercise in your life as part of priority and fitness?
Yeah, so I'm not as good at the rest of my family is better at exercise than me. I'm really disciplined about eating, but I like to spend a lot of time walking. So walking is really good and those type of things. I've been trying to do more yoga, and my daughter is trying to convince me maybe I'm thinking about doing bar next. So walking's my big exercise. Yep.
And let's say you had a busy day at work, right, with lots of meetings. What do you do in those? How do you find times to sort of unwind within that?
Yeah,
period?
so those type of times, one is making sure my energy level, so green tea, and making sure I'm eating healthy. Making sure I'm stretching, all those type of things. I have a stand-up desk that goes up and down, so standing up is very important to me, having time for stand-up. And then even if in between meetings, I try to take 5 or 10 minutes to find some joy. So maybe in 5 minutes, I'll try to call my mom or my husband. So they're having those snippets of joy, too, in the long days.
What are conversations with your mom like right now?
Oh, right now, what are those conversations like? She'll ask me about Simmons, of course. She'll ask about the grandkids and my husband and those type of things. And then she's 89. A lot of times we'll talk about her girlfriends and we'll reflect on life when I was a little girl or those type of things. I will take out my iPad and show her pictures. So I just visited her yesterday. So yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm thinking, on the one hand, you're the president of Simmons University, right? On the other hand, from the eyes of your mother, you're this little girl.
I'm still a little girl.
You're a little girl, right? And she must be worried about whether you've eaten or not, right?
Is your mom still living?
My mom.
So your mom must be like my mom. Let me tell you a funny story. So my mom is in assisted living, and the recreational therapist is a young lady who's about the age of my son. And my mom says, she calls her over, she goes, my daughter is about to catch a taxi. It was really an Uber because my mother doesn't get Uber. She goes, and I want you to walk her to the taxi because I'm worried about her safety. And the recreational therapist goes, Miss Perry, your daughter's old enough to be my mother, and she'll be fine going to catch the taxi. I don't need to walk her over. So yes, my mother will still say, call me when you get home because I'm worried about you. You're always your mother's child. So there are many roles in life. I do this map is what are the roles you take? So I'm president, I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a community member, I'm a mother. And knowing those roles and where you show up. So yes, my mother does still worry about me. She'll say, take some snacks, take some water with you when you go.
I know that as president, you'd have lots of responsibilities and lots of people trying to pull you in different directions
right.
At any point in time, right? So how do you juggle and balance this?
Yeah, I go back to those 3 strategic quarters that I talked about. One is that this notion of, okay, every day, is it in one of those buckets? Am I doing something to elevate Simmons through distinction and differentiation and helping Simmons have transformation through research, scholarship, and teaching, all of those type of things? Am I doing something for the community well-being? Or am I doing something for financial sustainability? If it's not in those 3 buckets, I'm saying no.
And even when that's happening, are you also aware that you're also living your life? Right, years of your life,
right,
through it all, right?
Right, yeah, and I'm thinking about where I am in that stage of life too, inside and outside of work, and what I want to create. So I'm thinking about those type of things. As far as one of the big things is that I do a vision board every year. So my daughter and I, but more my daughter, in January we do a vision board together with our family members. And I'm thinking about, okay, so I got the Simmons part of my vision board, and then I have the personal part, but I have my family part. So part of this is also how do you parent adult children? Right. How am I a good daughter to my mother? How am I a good niece to my aunts and uncles? So I have, I have all of my aunts living. None of them have children, so I want to be a good niece too.
But does that, and I know I grew up in an environment where all my teachers looked up to me and all that, and there was always this wanting to fulfill the expectations of all people have of
right.
you. But do you think that's tiring at times?
Oh yeah, it is tiring. I was texting a girlfriend the other day, and she said, "Are you making time for self-care?" I said, "I'm making time for self-care, but I'm caring for a lot of other people too." And immediately she got on the phone and said that it is. And so this is why you have to balance the self-care with caring for others. My husband likes to use the analogy, first you have to put on your own oxygen mask on the plane, and then think about how you can care for others. But you're always, I'm sure your teachers, you were the superstar in your class, and so living up to those expectations and reminding yourself that you're human. We have a trustee on our board named Tiffany DeFoo, and she is president of the Tory Burch Foundation, and her book is called Drop the Balls. Sometimes you have to drop the balls. And you have to think about in your life, where is it okay to drop the balls? Because we're all human.
I'm sure you might have had those moments in your life where things felt out of control, a lot of things going wrong at the same time. So what do you do in those moments?
So those moments when I start to prioritize, okay, what matters? what's important, what are my values, and who matters, right? So prioritize, okay, what does Simmons need from me now? And then what do my children and my husband need from me now? What does my mother need? And then which balls can I drop? And once again, which balls can I delegate to someone else? And who can I collaborate with? So constantly asking that. And when I have those moments also, I say to myself, you know what? Someone else has been through this before. I'm not the first, even the pandemic, I'm not the first person who's lived through the pandemic. I'm not the first person who had to be a president of the university. Who are those smart people I can call on for advice and a guidance and a roadmap?
You talked earlier about a little bit about your spiritual practice, I think early on.
Right.
So what sort of power do you draw from that? Or how does it help you?
So very much was raised in a spiritual practice of the Christian faith, but see spirituality as part of who we are. So a lot of my spirituality comes to meditating every day, praying every day. Even, my mom is 89, is always talking about praying every day. Sometimes it might be about yoga, but it's also spending time asking why, the spiritual side, why am I here on earth? And then who am I here to serve? And what are the lessons in the hard times and the good time? And part of my spiritual side also is that it goes back to, I believe being a spiritual being is aligned with philanthropy. So what am I here to give back to the world through those 5 T's that I talked about, the treasure, the time, the talents, and the testimonies, and the ties. So a lot of spiritual being. On my faith-based, Sunday's kind of the day of spiritual being. So growing as a child, you didn't do any work. So always trying to make time on Sunday also to live my faith.
And to people who might seem lost or disconnected at times, I think a lot of people go through that at different points. What would you say to help them in terms of how to get back that sense?
Yeah, how to get back to that particular time is that it goes back to, I really encourage people to think about, okay, what are the many forms of well-being? I think of well-being as a wheel. So if I'm feeling lost and I'm feeling disconnected, is there something going on physically that I need to heal? Do I need to see a doctor or a healthcare provider? How is my mental state going, and how am I taking care of my mental state? How am I thinking about my spiritual well-being? Is that impacting me? Am I thinking about my social well-being? When's the last time I had spent time with friends? When's the last time I did joy? On Saturday, there was a mini reunion for Simmons class of 1984, and about 30 people who graduated from Simmons got together, and just seeing them in community and talking about dorm life and their career and their families. We all have to make time for the social part of it. And then, am I making time for my spiritual well-being? So well-being, I start to ask people, okay, what are you doing for the many forms of well-being? And then even career and financial well-being can take a toll on you. Recently, I've been thinking about Simmons' role from how do we make sure that we're educating people for their financial and their career well-being, starting from what I'm saying, from backpack to the boardroom and beyond. So thinking about high schoolers and Arrive and Thrive for high schoolers, thinking about the college experience, thinking about young career, mid-career, and even thinking about what does well-being look like once someone retires.
Right. Yeah, and those are just different stages of your life, right?
Those are just different stages of your life. And in each stage of your life, you have your physical being and you have your spiritual being, and thinking about what you want to accomplish, and going back to our favorite word, your life work at each stage. I mean, even my mom in assisted living, I think she would say her life work now is attending the activities and giving wisdom to all the nurses and the staff.
One of the people I interviewed earlier was this professor, and I mentioned her to you as Professor Brenda Derwin, and she talks about human beings as body, mind, heart, and spirit.
Right.
Right? And she says moving through time and space with a past history, a present reality, and future dreams and ambitions.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Right? And she says that these are all the people that are human beings. And when we talk about doing research with them, surveying them, doing interviews with them and all that, we try to assume that they are just roles, lawyers, doctors, this and that. But they are these human beings who are complete and who have a past, a present, and a future. And all these dreams, insecurities, everything, right?
Right. That aligns with two of the things I talk about. I often say is that we're here to be a good ancestor. So being a good ancestor is honoring the past. It's conquering the opportunities of the problems of the day, and then it's leaving a legacy for the future. But the other thing that speaks to her words is that we all lead from the head, the hand, and the heart. So the head is the mental state, and I'm very heady. The heart is the emotional challenge we talked about, the love that we have for humanity. And then the hand is you got to do the work. You have to do the work. The other thing that speaks to your professor is, sometimes when people pass, and for some reason I was thinking about my father all weekend, and we don't have a physical presence, but you always have the spiritual presence around you. And so I was thinking his spiritual being was really around me a lot this weekend.
And you draw strength from that?
Yeah, draw strength from that. And I forgot what it was, but it was something I was thinking about. I was like, oh, my dad is here right now. Yeah.
Right, yeah. No, and I guess in that ways, when people lose people, right?
Right.
The fear of losing them goes away.
In my faith-based tradition, there's an expression, to be absent in the body is to be fully present in the spirit. And so you get 100% of my father's experience. It's likewise with my in-laws.
One of the questions I had here was about serendipity.
Yes.
And what has been the role of serendipity in your life and your career?
Yeah, and so serendipity is so many ways. And I like to think of it, serendipity is when something happens in your life and it's where opportunity meets with what you're prepared for. So everything in particular in my life is about this thinking about how do you turn an opportunity into an advantage. From checking off accounting to my SATs to use that as an advantage to, I can tell you that one of the reasons I got contacted for the Simmons job was I had interviewed for another job and I turned it down. But the headhunter remembered it. I said my dream aspiration was to be a president of a women's college. And so when they were searching for the Simmons president, he told someone, oh, you should go interview Lynn Wooten because she said that's one of her dreams, to be a women's college. Meeting my husband when I went to interview for the PhD program, and he was one of the first people that I met on campus because in the office that I went and he was there sitting. So all of those are particular things. It's how do you take something in the moment, the location, the people, and the experience and make it an amazing opportunity. It's using those particular assets wherever you are. And if you have an asset-based perspective of life and say, okay, where are the good people? Where are the great people in the moment that I want to meet at Simmons, that I want to meet in Boston, that I want to meet through women's colleges? And how can I use this as an opportunity? Then you're prepared for serendipity.
One of the things I was thinking about is that when things happen in our lives, right? A lot of the times, we would have worked hard for it, but we count it as achievement in some ways.
Right.
And when sometimes, let's say, when somebody wins an award or gets a promotion or something, and this was something that I didn't write it, but somebody wrote it, and I thought about this, is that when people say that, oh, very well deserved,
yeah,
right? And the question that he was asking was that, is it what they deserved, or was it a grace they got?
Right. Yeah. Was it a grace? Was it a blessing?
Was it a blessing?
And what are those things that happen in their life to make it a grace? What makes it a blessing? Whether it be something, meeting a co-author and coming up with a research idea, or having a fabulous class session, or the ability to think about, the work that I do with the Boston Public Library. All of those are things that are sometimes just happen. You were at the right place at the right time and the right moment. And how you use that blessing, how do you use that grace to really show up and be the leader you're supposed to be is the calling every day.
Right, and it's very easy to feel entitled, right? Saying that, oh, I deserve to get.
I think both of us, that's not our persona, that's not the culture we come from. I see almost every moment as a blessing and a grace that I'm so grateful for.
It's just things aligned in certain way,
right?
And they may not very well have been. So it's like.
It's how it aligns, and then how do I turn it and make it into something even better? Right. And that's my value of excellence.
So in navigating all of these, right? What skills do you think have helped you so far in navigating life, career, all the challenges?
So going back again to part of things being a blessing and a grace is the ability to have an integrative mindset. To see things not as so distinct, but everything is integrative. I don't know about your kids, but I used to sit there and make my kids do jigsaw puzzles. And I believe that life is a jigsaw puzzle. It's this mosaic, and it's how we connect the puzzle pieces together. And so I often think about, okay, every situation I'm in, how do I use that to bring out the best in the university I'm working at, but also in my family and my friends? And so, for example, now Boston's very close to Philadelphia. So I think about how many times can I get down to Philadelphia to see my mom because I'm closer in Boston compared to when I lived in Michigan. Or, if I meet a great person, is this someone that my students would benefit for? So this great person's coming to campus, this author, this speaker. And so part of it requires a lot to be reflective about, okay, what's happening in my world, the people, the experiences, the location, and then how do I use it to be a blessing to others?
No, it's interesting you say this because I often think of myself as synthesizing contradictions.
Right.
And
so it's the same thing, yeah. Right.
And I think of it as dialectic thinking, where you're bringing disparate things together and trying to see the whole picture within details and trying to see the details within the whole picture.
Exactly. And even in your personal life, in my investiture, I joked and I thanked my kids because every time I had an academic conference where I would take them, I would make it a vacation too. I would say, okay, I have a conference in Orlando, so we'll go to my conference and we'll go to Disney. Or I have a conference in Chicago, we'll go to this museum.
Right.
It's how you bring those particular people together. We're not just separate siloed. It's how you bring people together to make this mosaic.
Yeah, and I think thinking of people as whole persons, right?
Right.
Who need, and I think that goes to your idea of transformative leadership.
It goes back to this transformational leadership. I remember in one convocation speech, Martha Pollack, who was the president of Cornell and one of my mentors, and when I was a dean at Cornell, she talked about college being a transformational experience. And she said something. Are you familiar with the Witness Protection Program? Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
So the Witness Protection Program is when someone squeals on a person committing a crime, and then they go into this Witness Protection Program so people can't find them. And you transform, you become this different person because you don't want anybody to find you. Well, she uses this metaphor. When you start college or any life experience and you come out of that, you should be like a caterpillar to a butterfly. You look like a different person. After someone spends 4 years at Simmons University, whether it be faculty, but especially our students, they transformed into a different person. And how does that transformation happen? Well, I talked about it happens in the classroom. It happens in being involved. It happens through mentoring and coaching and advising. It happens through them soaking up everything that Boston has to have in internships and co-op. And so each experience we should be looking at like quarterly, yearly, how we transform to a different person.
So when you talk about mentoring, right? What can we do more with mentoring, and what has been the role of mentors in your life?
Oh my! Mentoring goes back again to my personal board of directors, and Marion Wright Edelman talks about mentors being like lights. They light your path. They're lanterns. So they definitely have been there for good advice. They've thought about my career further down the road than I've thought about. They've helped me brainstorm. They've helped me strategize. Mentors. And I believe in intergenerational mentoring. So some of my favorite mentors are people younger than me.
Right.
I learn about technology and those cool things, and they're peer mentors. Our dean of the Eiffel School, I said, I need to learn more about AI now. So I'm often mentors are where I have knowledge gaps, where I have experience gaps. There are many case studies for me. I learn from mentors. And the whole world of mentoring is so different now. I have mentors that I meet with one-on-one. But sometimes, an influencer on the internet can be a mentor because you learn about their style or their best practice or their recipe. And mentorship has to be a reciprocal relationship. So I'm always trying to think about how I can give back to my mentors too, and think also about the next generation of my mentees.
So I imagine a world where every person has a mentor and every person is a mentee.
Every person is a mentee, and part of their mentor is on your board of directors. And I'm often joke with my daughter about, I say at some point I want to gather in all my mentees. I want to have a big party and celebrate all my mentees and the people that I've been able to share wisdom to too.
Right. I think because this is such an important piece.
Right.
And if we can, and I think what you're calling as a board of directors, right?
Right.
And I would imagine that this board of directors will have different skill sets, and they'll be from different areas.
Different skill sets, right. Different areas, different people, different backgrounds. They look totally different. Right. And that's the power. Your personal board of directors should be diverse.
So that for different situations, you have somebody or the other to go to.
Different situations that I say, who am I going to call on for this? Right. And I'm not going to call on that person because they're going to be too hard on me, or those type of things.
What do you think have been your biggest successes? I know your CV says a lot, but from your point of view?
I believe my biggest successes when I reflect on them are managing those pivotal moments and coming out of them and the lessons that I learned. So I start with one is that in a 2-year period, I finished my PhD, I started a professorship at University of Florida, and I had my son. That was a pivotal moment. And learning how to navigate from going from a PhD student to a wife, to a mother, and an assistant professor. And what that character in me, what that required, and the village of people in Florida at the time who supported me, in my church, in my community, and my friends there. So that was one pivotal moment. And then I think about 2020 and how I started my Simmons presidency. I call myself the pandemic president.
Right.
And all of those things were going on. My mom was moving. My son was launching his career in San Francisco. My daughter was starting college at Brown. My husband was reimagining his career. And so those transformational moments when there's lots of change and how we navigate that change and how we bring community together and make time for the personal life, the professional life, and the joy. So during the pandemic, one of my favorite moments is that my husband was having a big birthday.
Right.
But we couldn't get together because nobody could get together. And so creatively, we created a Zoom birthday party and we did a murder mystery. Right? So those type of things are what bring me joy. When I look back at my phone and I capture the pictures.
The next one is on resilience, and we talked a little bit about that. But in terms of your life, what have been the hardest moments?
The hardest moments go back again to when those transformational moments when I'm juggling lots of balls and managing change. And right, so when I'm trying to have a change in my career and there's a change in my personal life and I have to really transform and reinvent myself. And that's where it comes to myself. Once again, I have to be introspective. I'm reaching out to my personal board of directors. I'm reading lots of books to study how to deal with it. And I'm asking myself, what do I need to learn? What do I need to grow? Because part of resilience, as I said, is that you want to come out and be a better person than who you are.
And if you were not a university administrator, what would you be?
Wow, I've thought about this. And so you heard me say I would love to be a home economics teacher or something in that particular space, or maybe work in the foundation world. I've done a lot of work on foundations, and so maybe a foundation president and thinking about how foundations are places to convene mega communities for not only money, but for thought leadership to solve challenging problems, especially challenging problems as it relates to achievement in education.
What is something you wish you knew earlier in your life?
I really wish I knew how much time homework was going to take for my children, the homework table.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
So when you get home in the evening, how much time homework is going to take? Yes, that's what I really wish I knew.
Yes, and it happens with me even now. Like, it just takes much longer.
It takes much longer. I don't know if you have a homework table at your house, but we had a homework table at our house. Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it takes
It takes much longer. And sometimes I prioritize his homework to my work.
Right.
And then you're
tired. Right, then you're tired.
Sleep.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
Exactly.
It's
So
hard.
homework.
It's hard
right.
balancing. One of the questions which I was thinking of earlier was multitasking.
Yeah.
And I was joking with someone that earlier we would talk about like how multitasking 2 things at a time. And now the problem I face is that 2 things I'm able to do, but 3 things. How do I do the third thing at the same time? So I'll give an example. So I'm driving, and sometimes there's a meeting going on, so I'm called into a meeting.
Right.
And then my son wants to tell me something.
Right.
So then I tell him that, no, I can manage 2 things, but not the third thing.
Yeah, right. So I agree with you. Probably at most you can multitask is 2 at a time.
2 at a time,
But
yeah.
the 3-dimensional, I haven't got there yet. So I'm listening to a podcast and I'm driving, but I can't listen to a podcast and answer a question that my daughter may have. So yeah, most people will say focus on one thing, but I think our brains have become rewired where we can do 2 things. And so one is that really good leadership is about looking at your calendar and managing your calendar. So on Sunday evenings, I look at my calendar for the week. And then before I go to bed at nighttime, I'm looking at my calendar for every day. And I'm thinking about, okay, what are the priorities? And then when are there opportunities for multitasking?
Right, and I wish we didn't have to multitask, but I feel that the expectation has become to multitasking.
Right, the expectation, and I think our brains have changed too. It's because of the smartphone, this notion of multitasking.
Right, so there's just too many things that we have to do. Like, sometimes I worry about my students, so I always talk to them about stress. I tell them that I'll make you work hard, but you should have fun. And if you're not having fun, that means I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
Right, and if you're getting stressed, I'm doing something wrong. Right, so hard work is fine, but there should not be stress. So or at least ways to minimize stress. So and I worry a lot about our students' stress in general overall. Right. And I think about where that might be coming from in different areas of our lives.
And exactly. And so one of the practices I've been encouraging people to do is that really shuts down my brain to focus on one thing is reading fiction. And so spending time reading fiction books helps you focus on one task and not, it's hard to read a fiction book and multitask. And so that's what I've been encouraging. And I agree with you that we don't want our students stressed. And so we want to make sure that we have all the services and the culture to prevent the stress, whether it be tutoring or outside office hours, and encouraging them to find time for fun and joy.
Right. And I think whenever we do this one task at a time, right, we get into this state of flow.
Right, you get into the state of flow.
Right.
Exactly, that's a good point.
And that's why we feel completely connected with what we're doing.
Right, whether it be cooking or reading a book or even writing an email.
Right.
Getting into that state of flow. And so encouraging. And so that's why I like reading fiction books.
I know we talked a lot about this, but maybe what are your life principles, values that you follow, and what are your life lessons?
So life principles and life lessons are really integrated. My first one is that life is learning. From the time we get here to the time we go into the next life, learning it's always possible. So learning to do things and learning helps us to grow. It could be reading a book. It could be meeting a different person. It could be observation. But always thinking about learning and creating cultures of learning. Part of being a leader is that I have to be responsible for my individual learning. Then I have to be responsible for creating a culture where my team can learn, in which you and I talked about the collective wisdom, and even organizational learning and system learning. So learning is one. The other one I talk about is my value is this notion of excellence. And it's not perfectionism. It's the pursuit of excellence. Because when we think about what excellence could look like, we're able to bring so much joy into humanity.
Right.
So what does excellence look like for Simmons? What does excellence look like when you're trying that recipe? What does excellence look like when you're pursuing the best book that you want to read? And then, my big life lesson is that life is not a solo sport. We all need community. We need community because it helps us learn and grow. We need community because it helps us to be resilient and go through those crucible moments. We need community because through the collective wisdom, we can solve so many of the world's problems and see opportunity. And then we need community for joy and fun.
And also because we are individuals, but we are connected individuals.
Right, we're connected individuals.
Right, so we're not completely separate individuals. So
we're not. No, we're all connected through this circle of life. And the many forms of community, intergenerational community, academic communities, faith-based communities, geographical communities, all these different type of communities, hobby communities.
Right, I saw this initiative by someone in India who, there was a very famous person called Ratan Tata who recently passed away, and he was, I think, 87. And there was a young person in his 30s who was associated with him. And he started this group called Goodfellas, where he was talking about younger people becoming a friend to a much older person.
Right, intergenerational community.
Intergeneration, yes. Right? And he got a group of these younger people together, and they all started going and spending time with older people. And he's trying to start some sort of movement over there. And I thought that's really important because sometimes we think of friendships as with our own age groups.
Right. So intergenerational is so important. When my daughter was in 5th grade, they had senior buddies, and every month they went to an assisted living facility, and they had projects they did with their buddies.
Really?
And that was really instrumental. And then when she was in college, what she did is through an intergenerational project, she went to a seniors facility and taught dance. So this power of intergenerations, you heard me talk about my younger mentees. And so those opportunities that we can bring together, even in the classroom, bringing different generations together is so important.
No, I think that's
bringing alum back. That's why bringing alum back. We're thinking about how do we re-energize the alum mentoring program here at Simmons to create those intergenerational connections.
And that'd be wonderful because we have such a huge and supportive alumni. And what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness means to me having peace of mind and having well-being, and just being able to have fun with the people I love and the communities that I belong to.
I think that sort of, if you had to pick keywords, I think that sort of makes you.
That's my DNA.
That's the DNA, I think, right? I have a bigger question, and I'm thinking about, okay, so what are your goals now, professionally and life-wise?
Oh, life-wise. Yeah. So life-wise, I still thinking on the professional side. I'm really thinking a lot about the reinvention of higher education and what the world of college means post-pandemic. And so how do you create colleges for affordability? How do you create a college for Simmons to be a place where people get a return on their investment? How do we integrate the liberal arts with life work professional education is important to me, and creating this place where students and faculty and staff can thrive. So that's the big thing. This model university of excellence where everyone is thriving, and it's a sustainable model of thriving. That's the big one for me, and it's meeting the systems change that we see. So, and then on the personal side, I'm thinking a lot about what it means to be kind of a senior now, right? I'm 58, so what does it mean to be a senior, and how do you serve the world in that capacity? What legacy do I want to leave? How do I be a good wife? How do I mentor adult children so that they're out and thriving and creating their legacy?
What mentoring advice would you have for people who might be watching this interview right now?
Yeah. One, personal relationships make a difference. And so seek personal relationships that are going to help you grow, that are going to help you learn, that are going to contribute to making you better in emotional intelligence, that you're going to learn from their shared experiences, that they're going to challenge you to expand your expertise and your execution capabilities. But yes, I would say have a whole constellation of mentors and also give back to mentees. And remember that all of us have this humane aspect of our spiritual being, and to get to know people.
And maybe one message for Simmons faculty, staff, and students as to what more could the Simmons community do to help themselves as well as help you, help them?
Right. Well, one, I want to start with community again. When you see people in the hall, speak to them. Have a 2-minute conversation. Ask how they're doing, what they're studying, how's their class going, how's the research going, what's happening in their personal life. And then the other thing is, tell the Simmons story. Simmons is a magical place. 125 years of educating people for their life works and creating everyday leaders who take their professional degree and serve the community. And think about ways that you bring the Simmons story to life as a faculty, a student, and a staff. And think about ways you can share the Simmons stories with others. It's really important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn. Is there anything else you want to talk about which we didn't cover?
I think you covered it all, other than I often say is that lift as you climb, and ensure as you're lifting and you're climbing, you're creating places where people can thrive and be excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.